Hello, everyone. My name is Mitchell Hammonds. I'm a candidate for a Master's of Public Administration here at the College of Charleston, and I just want to begin by thanking you for taking the time to watch my Ignite presentation as I walk through the learning process in this journey of public administration. A little bit of information about myself for those who may not know me or know me as well. I'm a native of Greenville, South Carolina, and I did my undergrad at the University of South Carolina in Columbia, where I studied communications and leadership studies. From there, I had a background in student development at the Medical University of South Carolina, and I talk about that experience quite a bit in my portfolio. And after some time in the private sector, I currently do some nonprofit consulting work with association options, and I'm also a certified personal trainer and indoor cycling instructor. I like to say that my purpose is to elevate communities that lack breath, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. By public administration is truly a personal experience for me that developed a community perspective. And when I say that my purpose is to elevate communities that lack breath, for me, a community that has breath has the proper infrastructure, resources, and leadership to promote positive community outcomes for its citizens. And so when a community lacks breath, they're lacking these three elements that contribute to positive outcomes. And my perspective of building stronger communities in this way began with public education. I was a first generation college student, first person in my family to graduate with a 4-year degree. And I realized that my community didn't have these three elements to promote positive educational outcomes for its citizens. But not only that, I note transition in my portfolio of my interest moving from public education to public health. And I noticed that it's these same three elements that my community was lacking that led to my experience with childhood obesity and so many others in my community experiencing poor health outcomes. And so both public education and public health both rely on these three fundamentals that contribute towards positive community outcomes. Minutes to talk about my process of learning, the process of becoming a public administrator, and discussion of the core competencies. Establishing competencies started with this hierarchy of learning, developing knowledge, and being able to apply skills, and then ultimately forming an attitude around some of these competencies in the way that we fulfill our roles as public administrators. And there's 5 core competencies that NASPA establishes for our profession. And I'm just going to take a moment to touch on one topic specifically under each of these, but each of these slides will show my hierarchy of learning. So, in considering leading and managing in the public interest, this shows my hierarchy of learning from looking at the founding documents of our nations and understanding the statelessness in which public administration lies, to moving into developing skills of working with people and motivating members, and developing an attitude of adaptive leadership. But what I want to focus on here is this circle right here that's called the Golden Circle by Simon Sinek. And I think about this when I think about the idea of intrinsic motivation in the public sector and how we don't do the work that we do for financial gain like so many do in the private sector, yet it comes from an internal need, a desire to fulfill a public value. And understanding how to participate and contribute to the policy process. This began with understanding the powers and influences within the policy process, and then moved into being able to apply skills to doing research about policy problems and understanding the alternatives and coming up with solutions. But what I really want to focus on here is the attitude that I shaped in this process. And considering Dahl's criteria for democracy, we were asked how well the United States is doing in meeting the criteria for democracy. And I said, not well. And it comes down to the fundamental of equality. He establishes this either specifically or alludes to it in each of his criteria. And I think we can all understand how America is still grasping with the idea of equality and what that looks like for all of our people. Making evidence-informed decisions in a complex and dynamic environment. This is really the foundation of research methods. Understanding the knowledge behind conducting qualitative and quantitative analysis, and then being able to use that knowledge to apply skills and understanding data and using the data to make informed decisions. What I really want to focus on here is the idea of targeted universalism. And I think this is important because so often we lean on data, but the data does not necessarily account for the situatedness of communities. And so it's not a one size fits all. You really have to look at how different communities experience disparities in different ways in order to make sure that we take policy in a targeted approach to help elevate those communities for positive outcomes. articulating and applying and advancing a public service perspective. This really began with understanding law and ethics, starting in public service roles and responsibilities, but even looking at the course that I took specifically on law and ethics. But understanding the fundamentals, the dichotomy between balancing law and ethics, and then moving into being able to apply those skills and advancing a public service perspective that meets the needs of citizens and decision making. And then lastly, shaping my attitude, I took a course on social entrepreneurship, but looked at ways that we can use an entrepreneurial mindset to solve social problems and kind of eliminate the bureaucratic nature that we often encounter in public agencies in solving problems. What I really want to focus on real quickly is just accountability, and that's what law and ethics come down to, is being accountable to both the Constitution, the laws that govern our nation, the lawmakers that make it, but also being accountable to the needs of our citizens, those that we work for and represent. Competency considers diversity and inclusion in the field of public administration. And this began with learning a lot about diversity and inclusion and the ways in which masculinity and even whiteness has manifested itself in society at large. And how do we begin to address that? And in human resources, we started to talk about strategies for diversity management and also fostering inclusion with our companies and organizations, and developing communication strategies that, address representation both in our organization's human capital, but also in our communications to the public at large. But lastly, I want to discuss unconscious bias and this concept of acknowledging unconscious bias, that we all have it individually and within our organizations and within our fields, but that we start to become more inclusive through addressing it, acknowledging it, owning it, and starting to shift our mindsets to see different communities in a different perspective. Thank you again for taking the time to watch my Ignite presentation and for reviewing my portfolio, as well as all of your support during my experience in the Bachelor's of Public Administration program at the College of Charleston. Thank you.